On August 1, 1943, a B-17 gunner from the 91st Bomb Group faced a deadly problem. Enemy fighters swarming his bomber formation. His desperate tactic to survive looked suicidal, but shot down 17 fighters and changed air combat tactics forever. In 1943, high above occupied Europe, Allied bomber formations moved steadily toward their targets. B, flying fortresses, heavy and slow, crawled through thin daylight at 25,000 feet. Their engines droned, shaking the airframe and rattling the nerves of every crewman inside. Luftwaffe fighters waited below and beside them. Jagdgeschwader squadrons hunted these lumbering giants with ruthless precision. The German pilots knew the bombers' weak points and struck like hawks, aiming to break the tight formations and shoot down the vulnerable aircraft. Inside one B-17, a young waist gunner prepared for the inevitable. He was 21 years old, his hands raw and numb from the biting cold at altitude. The dark metal of the fuselage felt unforgiving beneath his gloves as he checked his guns and scanned the horizon. This gunner was known among his crew for a bold, unorthodox tactic. He climbed fully into the open waist hatch, exposing himself to the freezing wind and enemy fire. His actions broke every safety rule, but the move gave him a wider field of view and better chances to spot approaching fighters early. Men whispered about his luck and daring. Some called it reckless, others called it genius. His tactic was simple: see the enemy first, shoot first, and survive longer. This approach was about to change the way aircrews fought in the bomber streams. It challenged standard procedures and pushed the limits of what a single gunner could do against the deadly attacks from Luftwaffe fighters. On that day, as the bombers edged closer to their target, this young gunner's choice would test survival in a new way. His daring step into the open hatch marked the start of a tactic that would spread through bomber crews and influence air combat over Europe. In the skies of 1943, survival depended on every decision and every second. This gunner's story was one of those decisions, a small action with a large impact on the deadly fight high above enemy territory. On a cold morning in early 1944, a B-17 bomber crew prepared for a mission over enemy territory. The sky was still dark as they readied their gear. Oxygen masks were tested and adjusted. Flak vests were strapped tight. Their .50 caliber machine guns showed signs of heavy use. The waist gunner sat quietly, checking his ammunition belt. His fingers trembled from the freezing air inside the unheated bomber. Older crew members watched him with a mix of curiosity and caution. He said little, eyes locked on the horizon beyond the open hatch. Minutes earlier, the crew had received their briefing. Intelligence warned of enemy fighters waiting along the bomber route. Heavy resistance was expected. Their task was clear: reach the target, drop the bombs, and survive the return flight. The engines roared to life, shaking the airframe. The ground below began to fall away slowly as the bomber lifted off. The waist gunner pulled a small photograph from inside his jacket pocket. He glanced at it quickly before tucking it back out of sight. Fear was present in the cramped space, but it was quiet and controlled. Each man knew the risks. Each man accepted the mission. Survival depended on discipline and focus. The bomber climbed steadily to its cruising altitude of 25,000 feet. The temperature dropped even lower at that height. The waist gunner adjusted his gloves and checked his gun's mechanisms once more. Every second counted. The older crew spoke in low tones, sharing advice and experience. They reminded the younger men of the dangers ahead. Enemy fighters would attack in groups. Flak bursts could tear apart the airframe. There was no room for error. The waist gunner's gaze remained fixed outside. He scanned the gray sky, looking for any sign of movement. The silence inside the plane was tense but purposeful. Every crew member played a vital role. In the coming minutes, the bomber formation would tighten. Escort fighters would arrive to protect them. Yet the threat was real and constant. The waist gunner's hands steadied as the engines reached cruising speed. He knew that once over enemy territory, 6 seconds could mean death. This mission was just beginning. Survival would depend on skill, luck, and the trust between these men sharing this metal fortress in the sky. Hours after takeoff, enemy fighters appeared as tiny black dots against the sky. The bomber flew at 20,000 feet, heading toward its target deep in Germany. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. The pilot's voice warned the crew, "Bandits at 2 o'clock high." The waist gunner unbuckled his harness. He climbed toward the open hatch, fighting the rush of wind. At 20,000 feet, wind speed reached over 100 miles per hour outside the plane. The gunner's uniform flapped violently. He braced himself, swinging half his body out into the open. Tracers zipped by, cutting through the cold sky. Enemy fighters closed fast to Messerschmitt Bf 109s, attacking from above and behind. The gunner fired short, controlled bursts into the streaking fighters. His .50 caliber machine gun barked in the wind. The bursts disrupted the enemy, forcing them into defensive maneuvers. Inside the bomber, the rest of the crew shouted at him to retreat inside and secure his position. They worried he exposed himself to fatal fire. He ignored them. The gunner held his ground, eyes locked on the attackers. The tracers kept coming, but he kept firing. His steady aim paid off. One Messerschmitt spiraled down, smoke trailing from its engine. A second followed, trailing black clouds as it lost altitude. The navigator, seated near the bomb bay, watched the kills unfold. His hand trembled slightly as he marked the 2 enemy fighters down on the map. It was a rare moment of victory amid danger. The gunner's face showed no relief or excitement. It was set and unreadable. Years of combat had taught him that survival came from focus, not emotion. This brief fight demonstrated the deadly challenge of bomber missions over Europe. Enemy fighters attacked with speed and surprise. Crews relied on teamwork and calm under fire. The waist gunner risked exposure because the bomber's defensive guns had blind spots. His position was one of the few that could cover the rear and sides effectively. Without his gunfire, the fighters might have broken through the formation and inflicted heavy damage on the bombers. At 20,000 feet and speeds near 200 miles per hour, every second counted. The gunner's quick response prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack. This engagement showed a key fact. Survival depended on suppressing enemy fighters before they got close. Defensive fire made the difference between life and death. The bomber crew learned that in combat, hesitation could be fatal. The gunner's choice to stand exposed saved the plane and crew. The 2 downed Messerschmitts reduced the enemy's air cover. It gave the bomber formation a brief advantage. But the danger was far from over. The navigator's shaky hand was a reminder. Behind every kill count was human risk and strain. Each victory carried a cost. This moment highlighted the harsh reality of air combat: constant threat, split-second decisions, and the thin line between survival and destruction. The waist gunner's role was vital. His exposed position was dangerous, but his firepower helped keep the bomber safe. In the sky over Europe, survival was never guaranteed. Every encounter tested training, nerves, and skill. The gunner's steady aim and refusal to retreat turned the tide in seconds. It was proof that survival often meant standing your ground, even when exposed. The bomber pressurized cabin offered some protection, but outside the hatch, the gunner faced raw elements and enemy fire head-on. The crew returned to their stations, alert for the next attack. The fight was not over. This encounter was a small but crucial part of the air war. Each defense against enemy fighters increased the odds of mission success. The gunners shot down Messerschmitts, reduced enemy numbers, and forced others to break off. That bought time and safety for the bomber group. This battle in the sky depended on clear roles, quick reactions, and steady nerves under extreme pressure. The gunner's action echoed the larger air war reality. Survival required courage and precision under fire. His unreadable face concealed fear or relief. In combat, emotion was a luxury crews could not afford. The bomber moved forward, battered but intact. The fight above was a deadly game of seconds and decisions. The gunner proved that sometimes survival meant making yourself a target to protect others. The war in the air demanded constant vigilance, skill, and a willingness to face danger head-on. This brief but intense fight marked the thin margin between life and death for air crews over Europe. The gunner's stand was a testament to the harsh truth. Survival was earned with every burst of gunfire and every second spent exposed to enemy attack. After the first attack, a tense calm settled over the bomber formation. The sky was cold and gray, the kind of cold that numbs fingers and stiffens muscles. Inside the bomber's cramped fuselage, the bomb bay doors creaked open. The cold metal edges bit at the crew's hands. The tail gunner's position was quiet now, but the danger was far from over. The gunner shifted slightly, feeling the chill seep through his flight suit. His lips were numb, barely moving as he began to reload the machine guns. The cold slowed his fingers, but he worked methodically. Every round had to count. He glanced back toward the wounded tail gunner. Blood soaked the man's glove, dark and spreading. The injury was severe, but the man stayed slumped at his gun, his breathing shallow. There was no time for words. Pain and fear were locked inside, unspoken. The radio crackled with static, useless for now. No messages, no commands. The crew listened carefully for the next threat. Every sound was sharp, the distant drone of engines, the flutter of metal in the wind. They waited for the scream of enemy fighters, returning to strike. The gunner wiped a mixture of sweat and frost from his brow. His body ached from tension and cold. His arms felt heavy, but he held his post, eyes narrowed against the glare of the overcast sky. A moment's distraction could mean death. Outside, the formation held steady. The bombers moved like ghosts in the low sunlight, their engines humming at 21,000 feet. The threat of attack was constant. Every minute without warning was a moment to prepare for the next strike. Inside the bomber, silence was thick. The men communicated with glances, hands, and brief nods. There was no shouting. The heavy breathing of the wounded man echoed softly. The gunner's heart beat steadily, matching the rhythm of the engines. The cold was relentless. Frost crept across the metal frames and inside the vents, chilling the crew to the bone. The gunner's breath came out in white puffs. His fingers tingled, but stayed steady on the weapon controls. Survival depended on alertness. The quiet was broken only by the soft click of the reloading mechanism and the distant sound of the bomber's propellers cutting through the thin air. The gunner scanned the sky in every direction, searching for movement, any sign of the enemy. He knew that in this moment, patience was as important as speed. The enemy could return at any second, diving from above or circling in the clouds. Every attack was a test of nerves and skill. The wounded tail gunner shifted slightly, trying to steady himself. Blood darkened the floor beneath him. The gunner wanted to help but could only watch. His focus remained on the sky, on survival. The radio remained dead. A constant reminder of isolation, high above enemy territory. No backup, no guidance, just the steady drone of the engines and the sharp cold. Outside, the bomber's shadow moved steadily across the landscape below. The mission was far from over. The bombers carried precious cargo that could change the course of the war. Every second counted. The gunner's muscles ached, but he stayed alert. He wiped at his brow again, the sweat freezing almost immediately in the cold. The tension in his body was like a coiled spring, ready to snap at the first sign of danger. He reminded himself that survival was a matter of discipline. One mistake could cost the lives of everyone on board. The tail position was critical. It was the last line of defense against the enemy's deadly attacks. Minutes passed with no sign of the enemy. The bomb bay doors opened wider, preparing to release their payload. The crew readied themselves for the next phase. The bomber was a fortress in the sky, but it was vulnerable. The gunner's eyes scanned the horizon again. He counted the seconds, measured the distance between clouds and enemy sounds. Altitude was their currency, and speed could turn into survival. The cold, the blood, the silence, they were all part of the war high above the ground. This was a battle of endurance as much as firepower. In this moment, the gunner understood what kept them alive. Steadiness in chaos, calm in the storm, the ability to wait and be ready. The bomber moved forward, carrying its wounded and its mission into the uncertain sky. The next attack would come, but for now the sky was silent. He tightened his grip on the gun controls. Survival was not just luck. It was the result of focus, training, and the will to carry on. This calm would not last, but it gave them strength. It gave them time. Time to survive. Time to fight again. The second wave arrived just after midday over northern France. German fighters came in low, attacking from beneath the formation. The American bomber crews had seen attacks from above and head-on, but this new angle caught many off guard. Inside the lead B-17, the tail gunner spotted a Focke-Wulf FW-190 slashing upward fast. He shifted position, dropping to one knee and leaning further out of his turret. Bullets snapped past his helmet, some kicking dust off the metal frame. The gunner's breathing tightened, but he held on. Suddenly, his machine gun jammed. The rapid fire stopped. His hands shook as he slammed the bolt, trying to clear the jam. The FW-190 closed in, less than 100 yards away and climbing fast. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The gunner worked the mechanism with urgency born of survival. The jam cleared. He squeezed the trigger and tracers tore through the air. The FW-190 shuddered and wobbled, then nosed downward in a steep dive. From the waist and nose turrets, crewmates watched in tense silence. Some faces showed awe. Others showed anger. They knew the tail gunner had broken protocol. Standard procedure warned against exposing yourself so far outside the turret. His risk was extreme. "Don't lean out that far," a fellow gunner muttered. "You're a target now." But the result was clear. The FW-190 was pulled away from the formation, breaking off the attack. One less fighter in the sky meant a better chance for the bombers to continue. The second wave kept pressing. More fighters darted in low. The gunner, now steady again, kept firing bursts between jams. Each successful hit forced another enemy aircraft into evasive maneuvers or retreat. His determination raised the crew's morale. The risk was real. At 12,000 feet, the bombers' defensive guns were the last line of defense. One misstep and a bullet could end a life instantly. Yet the tail gunner accepted this. Survival depended on controlling the space immediately behind them. The FW-190's speed was a threat, but also a weakness. Its attack from below gave it less time to stay in the firing cone of the tail gunner's turret. The gunner used this to his advantage, timing bursts precisely when the fighter climbed into range. The tail gunner's success forced the attacking fighters to rethink their approach. The bomber formation began adapting, tightening their defensive circles and shifting altitude slightly. Communication was difficult but vital. In combat, 6 seconds meant death, one pilot later recalled. The tail gunner's quick recovery from a jam made those 6 seconds count. Without his action, the bomber might have lost more planes in the second wave. The gunner's risky exposure went against training. But sometimes, tactics had to bend to survive. His crewmates felt the tension between discipline and necessity. Their survival depended on calculated risks. This moment highlighted the brutal calculus of bomber defense. Each gunner had to balance personal safety with the mission's success. The tail gunner's choice was a gamble, but it paid off. The bomber group pushed onward, sustaining fewer losses than expected. The second wave was blunted by the gunner's determined defense. The tail gunner's quick action became a small but crucial part of that success. The fighters kept falling away. The bomber formation climbed steadily toward the target, battered but intact. The tail gunner resumed his standard position, hands steady now, eyes alert for the next threat. This incident underscored a core truth of air combat. Surviving meant adapting fast. Protocol provided rules, but the reality of combat demanded split-second decisions. The tail gunner risked everything and saved lives. The story of that jammed gun and the daring move below the aircraft echoed in the crew's memories. It became part of the larger narrative about survival at high altitude, under fire. In the end, the bomber crews learned that survival often meant breaking the rules. The tail gunner knew if he hesitated, the fighter would have destroyed his plane. His choice forced the enemy back. This moment was not about glory. It was about doing what was necessary to keep flying another day. The crew's lives depended on it. The tail gunner's action reminded all that sometimes, survival was the highest form of courage. It was a lesson written in the harsh calculus of war. Back on the ground, the mood was tense. Officers gathered in the briefing room, their faces tight with concern. The squadron commander didn't mince words. "It's suicide," he said, pointing a finger at the gunner. "Your tactic puts every pilot at risk." The gunner stood quietly. His voice was flat when he answered. "They expect us to hide," he said. "I want them to see me." The room fell silent. His words were simple but carried weight. Other crews listened from the corners of the room. Some scoffed openly, shaking their heads. They thought the gunner was reckless, wasting good aircraft and lives. Others pulled out notebooks, scribbling down details. They wanted to understand how he managed to survive. The gunner's record was impossible to ignore. 17 confirmed kills in just 3 missions. That was almost unheard of in such a short time. The intelligence office verified every claim. Enemy fighters shot down, one after another. Rumors spread quickly through the base. Some called him lucky, as if fate alone saved him. Others whispered about skill, patience, and nerves of steel. But no one could deny the raw numbers. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of envy, fear, and respect. Pilots who had never met him debated the tactic. Was it brilliance or madness? Could anyone else do the same and live? The commander paced the room. "We have rules for a reason," he said. "We fly in formations. We protect each other. Flying solo like that breaks discipline." He gestured toward the gunner. "You break the rules." The gunner shrugged. "Rules are for survival, not for hiding," he replied. "If I don't fight like this, I'm dead the first time I meet an enemy." Some officers exchanged looks. The tension was clear. The gunner's tactic challenged the established order. It forced them to reconsider what worked in air combat. Squadron leaders debated. Could this aggressive style be adapted? Was it only possible for exceptional pilots, or did it put the entire unit at risk? The gunner's method was simple but risky. He flew aggressively, making himself visible to lure enemies. Instead of hiding or running, he attacked head-on. That forced opponents into quick decisions. This tactic relied on speed and surprise, not slow maneuvering. The gunner's aircraft was heavy but powerful. He used dives to gain speed, then climbed sharply to reset his position. Altitude became his currency. Flying this way demanded precise timing. If he misjudged a dive or climbed too late, he would be vulnerable. For him, every second counted. The commander finally spoke again. "Your kills are impressive. But how many times did you get lucky?" he asked. "How many close calls didn't end well?" The gunner didn't answer directly. He simply said, "I take calculated risks. That's the only way to survive." Many pilots found it hard to accept. They were trained to stick to formations, cover each other, and avoid unnecessary risks. His approach was different. Yet the gunner's success forced a new conversation. Could survival depend on changing tactics? Was hiding in the clouds less effective than drawing fire and striking fast? Throughout the base, stories spread. Pilots recounted the gunner's daring moves in dogfights. Sometimes he was outnumbered 3-1. Yet he rarely lost a fight. His kills were fast, sharp, and deadly. He didn't waste bullets or time. The math was clear. 17 kills in 3 missions meant nearly 6 kills per sortie. The gunner's tactic had proven effective but dangerous. It demanded skill and nerves. Not every pilot could handle it. Those who tried to copy him often crashed or were lost. The tactic was not for everyone, but it showed a new path in air combat. The debate continued. Some officers felt it was too risky for general use. Others thought it was a breakthrough. One pilot said quietly, "Maybe the old rules don't work anymore. Maybe we need to fly like him to win." The gunner stayed mostly silent during these discussions. His focus was on the next mission, not arguments. The airbase was alive with conflicting opinions. But one thing was certain: his tactics had shaken the squadron's thinking. In combat, 6 seconds meant death. His aggressive style gambled on those seconds, and so far it paid off. The squadron commander ended the meeting with a warning. "If you fly like this, don't expect us to cover your mistakes." The gunner nodded. "I don't make mistakes." The tension between old tactics and new risk was clear. The gunner's survival depended on pushing limits. The squadron's survival depended on discipline. This moment marked a turning point. The gunner's approach challenged tradition. It forced commanders to rethink how air combat should be fought. Survival was no longer just about formation flying and covering fire. It was about speed, aggression, and daring. The gunner's kills were confirmed. 17 enemy fighters destroyed in 3 missions was a record few could match. Some called him reckless. Others called him a hero. The truth was somewhere in between. The lesson was clear: survival often meant breaking the rules. And sometimes, surviving meant being seen. The gunner's story spread beyond the base. His tactic would influence other pilots. It showed that in air combat, the bold often survived. The aircraft didn't change. The tactic did. And that changed the air war. The next mission began with worse conditions than before. The B-17 bomber flew through a sky thick with flak bursts. Exploding shells surrounded the aircraft, shaking it violently at an altitude of 25,000 feet. The waist gunner's friend, stationed in the ball turret beneath the plane, screamed over the intercom. The call was urgent. Enemy fighters were closing in from multiple angles. The waist gunner hesitated for a moment, aware that moving meant exposing himself to deadly fire. Still, he climbed towards the hatch, fully visible to all threats outside. Drawing attention to himself was dangerous, but it distracted the enemy. His movement forced the fighters to focus on him. This gave the rest of the crew a chance to regroup and prepare their defenses. In aerial combat, any distraction could mean the difference between life and death. During this time, one of the bomber's 4 engines was hit. It sputtered and died, causing the plane to shudder uncontrollably. Losing an engine reduced speed and maneuverability, making the B-17 a slower, easier target. The crew faced a critical test of endurance and skill. Despite the damage, the waist gunner kept firing. His machine gun barrel heated until it glowed red. His jaw clenched tight, eyes fixed on the attacking fighters. Every burst of fire was an act of survival for the entire crew. Later, the co-pilot would say the gunner's actions saved their lives. By drawing enemy fire and holding them off, he prevented a more devastating attack. The bomber managed to stabilize and continue the mission despite the loss of an engine. The waist gunner did not speak much about the event afterward. Instead, he stared silently at the ruined sky, dotted with black puffs of flak and tracer rounds. The destruction overhead was a constant reminder of the razor-thin line between survival and death. In combat, exposure meant risk. Moving to the hatch made him a target. But it also became a shield for his crew. This choice demonstrated a brutal fact of air war. Sometimes one man had to take the biggest risk to save many. The B-17's rugged design helped in this crisis. Its multiple gun positions allowed overlapping fields of fire. That meant attackers had to face concentrated resistance from all sides. Still, each gunner's role was vital, especially when the bomber was damaged. The engine failure lowered altitude and ground speed. This reduced the plane's ability to avoid flak and fighter attacks. The crew had to rely more on teamwork and defensive firepower to survive. The waste gunner's decision bought them critical seconds. The mission continued with damaged engines and heavy flak. Each second in the sky was a fight for survival. The pressure on every crew member increased. Their training and discipline were tested in real time. Survival depended on clear roles and quick decisions. The waste gunner's hesitation turned into decisive action. His willingness to risk himself reflected a harsh reality. Individual sacrifice could keep the crew alive. In the end, the bomber returned to base with one engine lost and several wounds in its fuselage. The crew's lives were saved by that moment of exposure, of courage under fire. The co-pilot later remembered, "He saved us all. Without that distraction, we wouldn't have made it." The waste gunner's silent stare at the broken sky held another message. War was not about glory or heroism. It was about survival. Every mission was a test of endurance against overwhelming odds. This episode showed one clear truth. In combat, each man's choice affected everyone. The bomber survived because the waste gunner took the risk. His actions allowed the others to fight another day. The damaged B-17 and its crew returned with scars but intact. Their story was a testament to the brutal cost of aerial warfare. It highlighted the thin margin between life and death at 25,000 feet. The gunner's role was not glamorous, but it was essential. His decision to expose himself changed the outcome. In the war's brutal calculus, survival often hinged on such moments. That day, the waste gunner became the shield for his crew. The sky remained ruined and dangerous. But the bomber lived to fight again. In the air war, survival was the highest victory. The gunner's choice proved that. The aircraft didn't change. The tactics did. And that made all the difference. Night falls over the airbase. The sky darkens quickly, swallowing the last light. On the edge of the tarmac, a lone gunner sits on an overturned crate. His uniform is dusty and worn. The steady rhythm of his hands cleaning the machine gun breaks the silence. The weapon gleams under the dim light of a bare bulb hanging from the hanger. He works slowly, deliberately. The barrel is cold, the parts worn but reliable. His fingers move with practiced ease, almost automatic after months of combat. The base is quiet now, the chaos of daytime sorties replaced by the hum of distant engines and occasional voices. A younger airman approaches, his steps hesitant on the cracked concrete. He wears the faded uniform of a replacement. His eyes search the older man's face for answers. He stops a few feet away, clear enough to be heard but careful not to disturb the quiet. "Do you really think this tactic works?" the younger man asks quietly. "Is it worth all the risk?" The gunner pauses, his hands stilling for a moment. He looks up slowly, meeting the younger man's gaze. His eyes are hollow, reflecting years of battle and loss. There is no bravado in his face. No excitement. Just a tired honesty. "It's not bravery," he says simply. "It's what keeps me alive." The words hang between them. No more, no less. The younger man nods slowly, unsure but listening. The gunner stands and moves over to the side of a battered fighter plane parked nearby. The fuselage is scarred with dozens of bullet holes. Many are clustered around the cockpit and engine cowling. He points to the marks with a steady finger. "This is where the enemy hits," he explains. "You can't stop all the bullets, but you learn to survive the ones that matter." The tactic isn't about fighting them head-on. It's about using speed and altitude to avoid the worst. He pulls a leather harness from the wing and holds it out. "Adjust your harness so you can move quickly but stay secure." This harness saved my life more than once. The younger man steps forward, accepting the gift. As the gunner helps him put it on, their hands meet. Both are trembling slightly, one from experience, the other from fear. The gunner's voice is low now. You won't feel brave every time. You'll feel scared. That's normal. But if you follow the tactic, you survive. The younger man swallows hard. He looks back at the bullet holes, then up at the fading sky. His nod is uncertain, but carries a hint of resolve. The gunner claps him on the shoulder. We all want to live to fly another day. That's the real reason we fight. In the growing darkness, they stand side by side. Two generations connected by the same harsh reality: survival in a deadly war. The base lights flicker as night deepens. Somewhere, distant engines roar to life again. The gunner picks up his weapon and resumes cleaning. The younger man watches, absorbing the hard lesson. It's not about glory, the gunner repeats quietly. It's about staying alive long enough to fight again. The younger airman nods once more. This time with a little more certainty. The lesson is clear. Survival depends on discipline, not heroics. The tactic they follow is a shield against death, not a sword. This moment at night on the quiet base captures the true cost behind every mission flown and every life saved. The war does not honor bravery as much as it demands endurance. The gunner's hollow eyes show the toll, and the reason they keep fighting. In the end, survival was the only victory that mattered. Letters from home arrived during a rare moment of quiet. The gunner unfolded each one carefully, reading in near silence. The words blurred together as his mind drifted away from the paper. Each letter carried news from families far behind the front lines, reminders of normal life paused by war. He thought of the men who never returned. The friends and comrades lost over fields of battle and skies filled with gunfire. Their absence was a constant shadow, more present than any medal or victory. The gunner's hands tightened around the letters, but he said nothing. His thoughts shifted to the enemy pilots he had faced. Young men not much older than himself. Faces he had seen through gun sights, frightened, desperate, fighting for survival just like him. The harsh reality was clear. Both sides paid a heavy price. There was no celebration for the kills. Each confirmed downed aircraft brought no joy, only a heavier weight on his chest. Victory felt hollow when measured against the lives extinguished on all sides. War was not a game. It was survival against constant loss. At mess that evening, laughter filled the room. Other men shared jokes and stories, trying to push the war's darkness aside for a while. But the gunner sat apart, quiet and withdrawn. The noise around him felt distant, unable to reach the memories that haunted his mind. He recalled the smoke trails of burning planes, the sudden silence after a burst of gunfire, the way the air seemed to hold its breath. The image of falling aircraft replayed constantly. These were not just enemy machines, but the last moments of real people. Survival had been the goal since the first mission. Every decision measured against the chance to live another day. But survival came with a cost: the faces of those who did not make it, etched forever in memory. These ghosts were the true burden of combat. The gunner's comrades noticed his silence but said nothing. They understood the toll of war was not only physical but deeply mental. Each man carried his own load of loss and fear. Some masked it with humor, others, like the gunner, bore it in silence. Letters from home were reminders of what they fought for, but also what they risked losing. The words brought comfort and pain in equal measure. They connected the front lines to distant lives, but made the sacrifices more real. In that moment, the gunner knew that the war's true challenge was not just enemy fire, but the struggle to hold on to humanity amid destruction. The faces of young pilots, friend and foe, were a solemn reminder. War demanded survival but stole innocence in the process. The gunner folded the letters carefully and looked out the window. Night was falling over the airfield. The distant sound of engines starting for another mission echoed faintly. Tomorrow would bring more combat, more decisions between life and death. For now, there was only memory and the unspoken weight of loss. No celebration, no relief, just the quiet understanding that survival in war always came with a price too high to forget. On the next sortie, the crew climbed once more into their bomber over the English Channel. The gunner stood by the hatch, the same position he had taken before. This time, the moment stretched longer. He hesitated, feeling the weight of the fear around him. He saw it clearly in his crewmates' ice-tight jaws, steady hands, and paler faces than usual. The enemy fighters had grown bolder in earlier missions. They attacked with sudden, brutal swarms, aiming for the weak points around the turrets and wings. But now, the gunner knew that his presence at the open hatch made the attackers pause. He moved forward, exposing himself again, just as he had before. His body was a target in the open air, but his gun was ready. The enemy pilots approached more cautiously. They no longer swarmed recklessly. Instead, they kept their distance, probing with less aggression. The gunner's tactic was simple: show the enemy that a man was watching, willing to fight back with every round fired. This tactic spread quickly. Other gunners on nearby bombers began to open their hatches, risking exposure to force enemy fighters to hesitate. The results varied. Some crews lost gunners who exposed themselves too soon or too long. Others found that the threat of active defense cut down the number of attacks. The battles became shorter, less deadly for many bomber groups. On this sortie, the bomber made it through with fewer hits than usual. The crew watched the skies constantly, but the tension eased slightly. The enemy attacks were fewer and less intense. The gunner's tactic had forced a new kind of caution in the Luftwaffe pilots. When the bomber landed back at the airfield, the crew gathered around the gunner. They grabbed his arms and shoulders. Their faces showed relief and gratitude. They knew his decision to expose himself had saved lives. The risk had changed the fight. The gunner said nothing. He didn't smile or speak. Instead, he looked up at the sky, quiet and thoughtful. He understood the stakes better than anyone. Every second in the open hatch was a gamble between life and death. This tactic didn't guarantee survival. It only shifted the odds. The enemy pilots still attacked, but now they weighed the risk of a sharp defense. The open hatch became a symbol of resistance and courage among bomber crews. The lesson was clear: survival depended on willingness to take calculated risks. The gunner's choice forced the enemy to rethink their attacks. It bought seconds, sometimes minutes. That meant the difference between life and death. In the air war over Europe, small changes like this altered the balance. A single gunner's exposure slowed enemy aggression. That hesitation saved crews and planes. The bomber crews never forgot this moment. It became part of their shared story, a reminder that survival required facing fear head-on, and that sometimes one man's courage could protect many. The war demanded tough choices. The open hatch tactic was one of them. It was a quiet act that spoke volumes. The gunner looked at the sky, knowing the fight was far from over. But for now, his decision had made the difference. In combat, survival often came down to who dared most. The war pressed on through late 1944 and into 1945. The gunner's name spread among his squadron. He was called a hero for his skill and courage in the turret. But the medals and praise felt distant to him. Inside, he felt older, hardened by months of constant danger. Every mission brought the same risks. He climbed into the hatch, feeling the cold metal against his hands. Engines roared beneath him as the bomber climbed to 25,000 feet. At those altitudes, each second in the air could mean life or death. He flew not for glory. He flew to survive. Each fight was a chance to live another day. And beyond survival was a fragile hope that one day the guns would fall silent and peace would come. His tactic, standing in the open turret to increase visibility and reaction time, had become standard across the squadron. Briefings now included his method as a recommended approach for gunners. Other crews tried it, some finding success. Others paid the price in losses. The tactic worked because it gave gunners a wider field of view. Standing up allowed them to spot enemy fighters earlier. Early detection meant faster response. They could track attackers diving from above at speeds over 300 miles per hour. But the tactic was risky. Standing in the hatch exposed the gunner to extreme cold and strong winds. At 25,000 feet, temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The gunner's face often felt numb before the first shot was fired. The wind could tear at the straps holding him in place. Still, the payoff mattered. Survivors credited the method with saving crews. The bomber's defensive fire became more accurate and quicker. Enemy fighters faced heavier and earlier resistance. The math was simple. Better visibility plus faster firing decreased the chance of a successful attack. Not every crew succeeded. Some gunners fell to enemy fire or frostbite. The tactic demanded physical strength and sharp nerves. The gunner knew that every flight risked everything. He trusted experience, training, and his own steady hands. The war changed him. He carried memories like a burden. The ice-gold metal of the turret, the relentless drone of the engines, and the sudden flash of tracer rounds filled his mind. He remembered the faces of friends lost in battle. He also recalled the faces of enemies, young pilots fighting just as fiercely. These memories shaped his nights and days. They reminded him why survival mattered more than medals. Each mission added weight to his outlook. The war was no longer about glory. It was about enduring the grinding conflict. He never stopped standing in the hatch. The tactic was not just a way to fight, it was a way to keep hope alive. It gave him a chance to see danger sooner and react faster. In combat, fractions of a second decided who lived or died. By early 1945, the tactic had spread beyond his squadron. Many bomber crews adopted it in Europe. It became part of the standard operating procedure for gunners. Commanders saw clear evidence that crews using the tactic had better survival rates. The gunner's story was part of a larger shift. The air war over Germany was brutal and fast. Enemy fighters attacked from all directions. Bomber crews learned to adapt quickly or perish. This tactic was a simple but effective innovation born from necessity. For the gunner, flying was no longer about the past or future. It was about each mission, each flight, each second spent scanning the skies. It was about staying alive and protecting his crew. That was his focus every time he climbed into the turret hatch. The war would end, but its lessons stayed with him. He knew survival wasn't about luck. It was about skill, tactics, and facing danger head-on. The tactic he helped popularize saved lives and gave crews a fighting chance. His legacy was not medals or fame. It was resilience and adaptation under fire. The gunner stood in the hatch, a quiet witness to the harsh realities of aerial combat. He carried the weight of survival and the hope for peace on every mission. The war changed him, but he kept flying. The roar of the engines and the cold metal of the turret became a part of who he was. His story was one of survival in a brutal war where every second counted. The gunner's tactic began as a desperate gamble. Faced with overwhelming odds and limited options, he risked everything to survive. What seemed suicidal at first soon proved effective. His aggressive defense forced enemy fighters to rethink their attacks. This single act reshaped air combat tactics. His method emphasized close-range fire from the tail turret, combined with sudden, unpredictable maneuvers. It exploited the gunner's limited field of fire, but maximized damage. Enemy pilots found it harder to approach without facing heavy flak. Over time, this tactic saved crews from being torn apart in midair. The tactic spread quickly. Other gunners adopted it, turning fear into a calculated defense. Losses decreased on bomber missions. More crews returned home. This shift in aerial defense changed the balance in the skies over Europe. Airmen learned that survival depended on taking the fight to the enemy, not just evading him. Yet survival came at a price. Many who used this tactic carried scars unseen. Empty bunks in the barracks told the story of comrades who did not come back. The gunner's story is not about glory or numbers alone. It is about the fine line between courage and survival, and the weight of choices made under fire. When the war ended, the tactic remained part of bomber defense training. New crews approached the tail hatch with caution and respect. Veterans remembered the moments when one man stood alone against attackers, buying time for his comrades. His legacy echoed in every cold dawn and every silent flight. This story is both a triumph and a burden. It reminds us how men altered the course of war, and what it cost them to do so. In the skies of World War II, survival was never certain. But sometimes, it came down to one gunner's choice to fight back.